Sly Cooper, Sucker Punch's 6th generation mascot platformer, which unlike most of its contemporaries which focused on a wide array of gadgets and weapons, Sly Cooper on the other hand emphasized on stealth, having you avoid combat and trying to get to objectives without getting caught. Like my last multi-game review video on Ninja Gaiden, I'll be writing my reviews for these games as I play through the series. I'm going in pretty much blind, only knowing a few details about the series just from being on the internet, like how Bentley eventually gets into a wheelchair, and that the 4th game apparently ends on a cliffhanger of some kind, and the fans that I've talked to are not particularly fond of Thieves in Time. I'm playing the PS3 HD collection of the series, which I've been told there are a few issues, and I'll be talking about those as they come up. It seems like most of the PS2 classics that got HD collections on the PS3 shipped with a glaring amount of issues, and in some cases are inferior versions of the original games. But without further ado, let's get into talking about the game that kicked the series all off, Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Damn, I love this game's aesthetic and art direction. Right from the start, I felt like a kid again coming home to play a new PS2 game, with how it seamlessly transitions from title screen right into actual gameplay of the prologue. The music, the comic book-esque cutscenes, and the monologues from Sly create this captivating tone and atmosphere. Though the mixing in some of these cutscenes is pretty bad, having music and sound effects being way louder than Sly's monologue. It's really noticeable in end-of-mission cutscenes.
A technique he developed while sneaking into the thickly fortified castles of feudal Japan.
It's an even bigger issue due to the fact that the game does not have subtitles, so you end up not being able to make out what he's saying. The sounds of this game are wonderful. I love the sounds Sly makes when he's sneaking around and how it will occasionally sync up with the music depending on the area. I was rather surprised how simplistic the game is, and I don't mean that as a criticism. It has a solid foundation with its core gameplay loop of being explore, sneak, collect, and repeat, though I wish it did vary up the location layout a bit instead of just having each villain's world be broken up by the first area needing 3 keys, then the next area needing 7. Then you would get to a boss fight, with 90% of the levels being 10 to 15 minute platforming trials containing some collectibles, with the other 10% of levels being mini games ranging from vehicle races or having Sly do tasks like whack 50 chickens. At least the collectible bottles went towards something in this game, unlike other collectathons where the collectibles are just for the sake of it. Once you get all the bottles in a level, you're able to open up a safe at the end, which will contain a page from Sly's family book, and it'll teach him a new ability or upgrade a current one. The only issue I find with these abilities is that they range from niche application to useless to downright awful. Hopefully in the next 3 games, the abilities will get way better. The main overarching issues with this port that I ran into are really bad frame rates in a few areas and some really wonky ledge detections, leading me to either falling off or just going around a ledge incorrectly. While the worlds have a very set in stone formula that they follow, they're all interesting from a design standpoint, my favorite being Miss Ruby's Swamp. The only one I didn't like was Clockworks because it's mostly made up of mini games, which are my least favorite aspect of the game. Most of the mini games, specifically the vehicle ones, feel rather poor. If you slapped wheels on Vulcan 300, it'd probably have better handling than Murray's van. They're not unplayable, mind you, but I didn't ever find them all that fun or engaging. The game's bosses are kind of a mixed bag, the weakest one being Panda King, which I don't even know if he was supposed to have a gimmick. I just ran up and jumped over his attack and whacked him with my cane until he died. Clockwork is the second weakest, having the first phase be a jetpack flying minigame, shooting at the weakened areas that Carmelita shot with her pistol. Then the second phase is a platforming obstacle, which I actually really liked, similar to the earlier one in the level, which I think was the highlight platforming section of the game. But once you get to his face, you just whack him until he dies, and it cut off his dialogue midway through, and it was really awkward.
You will never be rid of me. Clockwork.
The only reason I like this one more than Panda's is the obstacle course and the story moment of Sly and Carmelita teaming up together. Raleigh's boss fight is really simplistic, but I don't think that's bad because this is the first one and I see it more as a tutorial boss. Maybe if the game had mini bosses between the areas needing 3 and 7 keys, they would have been able to make the villains more complex. Mugshot's fight is pretty fun. I enjoyed the puzzle, but my favorite boss is Miss Ruby, and here lies the biggest issue with this port, and that's how it ruins this boss fight. The music music is either out of sync or becomes out of sync throughout this boss fight, which I see as a big issue when your boss fight is a Simon Says rhythm game. Not only does it ruin its presentation, the notes flying at you aren't in sync with the music, so you can't even follow the rhythm correctly. It's incredibly noticeable once the pace of her song starts to shift, usually in the second phase. Where the charm of this game really lies is in its characters and writing. The main cast plays off each other so well between Sly and Carmelita's flirtatious banter, Bentley's worrywart pessimism contrasting Sly's reckless abandon. I have to say though that Murray is by far the weakest of the main cast, due to Sly's only real interactions with him are right before his minigame driving levels, where he gets caught up in races because he's trying to get food. You spend 95% of the game talking to Bentley over the radio, so it feels like Murray's kinda left as the odd man out of this dynamic. I hope he gets more play in the future and some more characterization beyond being the fat idiot who is always hungry and drives the car. There really isn't much else to say about this game due to it being rather short. It only took me 5 hours on my first blind playthrough while trying to get all of the collectibles. It'd probably be even shorter if I just focused on the platforming instead of trying to collect all of the rather useless abilities. With the formulaic level design, once I explained one level, I have for the most part explained them all, barring the challenges based on the new abilities gained from collecting pages after beating bosses. I really liked this game. It's simplistic yet fun and effective. It made me a fan of the series almost instantly, with few complaints directed at the actual game itself and more at this flawed port. I'm excited to sink my teeth into the second game and see how Sucker Punch stepped up their game for the sequel. The jump from Sly 1 to 2 is genuinely astonishing. I had heard that Sly 2 would bring a lot of improvements, but I was not expecting this much increase in content variety. Sure, it still has its formula, but it makes sense from a narrative standpoint, and there are still largely varying events and activities in each episode that it doesn't start to feel samey like it did in Sly 1. They carried over one of my favorite aspects from the first game, that being the seamless transitions from the start menu right into the actual gameplay of the prologue. As soon as you get your hands on the controls, you can feel the increase in speed and agility of Sly compared to the first game, which had a nice weight to it. It really conveys the idea that Sly's come into his own after the events of the previous game, and getting back his birthright, the Thievius Raccoonus. Even just in the prologue, the trio feels more like a gang of equals, using their unique strengths to work together and get the job done, which I can't really say I felt that much in the last game, especially with Murray.
It took a lot of guts for him to get out in the field with me. I know he was scared, but he's got more heart than anyone I've ever known.
Who's the Murray? All I see is a fat, pathetic weakling.
I might be big and not as smart as the other guys, but one thing I'm not is weak.
In the first game, it always felt like Sly was doing all the work or cleaning up for the fuck-ups of the others, but in each of the episodes of Sly 2, there are multi-step tasks where you play as each of the characters to prepare to steal back the clockwork parts from the Claw Gang. The fact you can play as Murray and Bentley also really helps convey their growth from the first game, though the occasional section in some of these areas feels like it wasn't designed with Bentley and Murray in mind, like the final level where you need to cross these turbines to get to higher areas, or go all the way back to the start of the level to go to the high sections since this episode is very vertical. Maybe it was due to not having all the upgrades for these characters since I put most of my money into Sly since he's the most fun of the three and the one you'll be playing the most. That's another change from Sly 1 to 2. Instead of solely getting your upgrades from collecting all the bottles and opening a safe at the end of a level, you now have buyable upgrades that can be purchased in the safe house using coins. You still have the new abilities from the safes, but overall most of the upgrades upgrades feel really redundant or pointless, so I just focused on the mobility ones like the paraglider, which I found a lot of fun. Gadgets and abilities also run off meter now, that refills from health drops, which have also been added to this game because instead of both Sly and all the enemies dying in one hit, you now have a health bar along with enemies taking multiple hits to kill. The biggest difference from Sly 1 to 2 is its level design. Sly 1 was a group of obstacle course levels tied together in 4 worlds, with the 5th world comprising of mostly minigames and a boss fight. Sly 2 on the other hand has largely open hub worlds with missions sprinkled throughout them. I don't think one is particularly better than the other, but with the changes brought to Sly 2, the amount of obstacle courses has drastically decreased, having the game feel more like it's strayed a little too far away from the platforming for my taste. Surprisingly enough, most of the actual platforming challenges come in missions where you play as Bentley, but they are restricted to mostly having Bentley jump over things or around stage hazards than actual vertical platforming. My biggest complaint with the new level design is that you have to start each of these missions that are sprinkled all over the map as the character. So for example, if you want to start a Murray mission while you're playing Sly, you need to run all the way back to the safe house, swap to Murray, then run all the way to the mission start area, which will then have you run to another spot usually to go into the actual level itself. There's so much needlessly added tedium which could have been avoided just by allowing you to walk up to any mission and starting them and swap you to that character. There are some missions that start you off as one character, then mid-mission you'll change to another just to complete a small task allowing the main mission character to proceed, so it's clearly not impossible for them to do this. I'm guessing they have the game this way so that forces you to play the actual levels as Murray and Bentley and not just specific missions, despite areas with collectibles being inaccessible for them because they cannot platform as well as Sly. With the wide variety of missions now, there are a few that I don't really like. The racing missions where you need to keep up with Constable Neela are just plain bad. It has the same issue that following missions in Assassin's Creed have, where your base walk speed is faster than theirs, so you end up constantly ahead of them and need to stop moving to let them lead you to the destination. Now imagine that issue, but this time you're running and chasing someone. Most of the time you'll be ahead of Neela, making these missions feel like a huge waste of time, especially when she takes some of the most out-of-the-way paths through some of these levels. I felt that the bosses were a huge step down from the previous game, since all the bosses in this game focus on combat, which I think is by far the weakest aspect of gameplay. Every boss is beaten the same way. You just jump up and whack them a bunch of times. Sometimes they'll run away and you'll need to chase them down, but they all have the same core loop with this rather unsatisfying combat. I much preferred the Sly 1 approach of puzzles or gimmick bosses, because the non-gimmick ones like Panda King and Clockwork have the same issues as the bosses in this game. Sure, you could say that the puzzle and gimmick bosses were very simple once you figured out what you had to do, but completely abandoning the idea just feels like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in my opinion. A solid middle ground could have been achieved, and they could have had some more crazy puzzles and gimmicks with the gameplay additions in this game, leading to more memorable and varying bosses. Before getting into the game's writing and story, I want to talk about this port and the general issues I ran into. I noticed way more issues with this port compared to the first game's only major issue being the Miss Ruby boss fight. This game has major frame rate issues in multiple areas no matter what is happening in them, like in Dimitri's office in episode 1. This game also has the same issue as the Ratchet and Clank HD collection, where stuff that wouldn't have been on the screen in the original because it was 4:3 is now visible, so title cards no longer fully fit the screen or fade out properly, and it looks really weird when it fades to black or white and you can clearly see the overlay. And there are still areas on the screen where you can see parts of the game world not fading in or out because they're unaffected by this overlay. The audio in episode 5 for the first few minutes is incredibly staticky and just sounds awful. The camera gets caught on everything. Normally I would complain when cameras zoom in too close to the player character to tell what's going on while the camera moves over things in the background. This game doesn't even do that, leaving it caught on things as you move farther and farther away until it'll eventually snap back into place. This is especially bad in certain levels, like in episode 5 where Bentley is carrying an acid battery and if he gets hit once he dies and you have to start all over again. The camera will get caught in hallway doors, leaving you at an angle where you can't see the floor that's covered covered in spikes, so good luck finding the sweet spot to make it snap back into place, or just leap of faith and hopefully you land on a safe area. The jump detection is way worse in this game compared to the first, finding myself jumping onto the wrong thing all the time. It's even more annoying when there are levels that are incredibly vertical, like episode 4, 5, and 8, where jumping to the wrong thing just causes so much time wasting trying to get back up to where you originally were. I guess this is the compromise to having such forgiving latching on detection, allowing you to jump off a thing and not even be close to a pole, but still magnetize and grab onto it. Hopefully this will not be as bad in Sly 3. The writing in this game is amazing and even better than the writing in Sly 1. The banter is even wittier, the stakes feel higher, the characters feel more believable, layered, and grounded. The writers had a full understanding of their characters and what they wanted to do with them, allowing for these characters to have great growth from these events and experiences. Sly and Carmelita play off each other even better than the last game. It's always just a joy to hear their back and forth. The stakes are the biggest they've been yet, trying to get back all the clockwork parts, having the gang separated halfway through the game, with Murray and Sly being captured by Contessa. Most importantly, the story gives weight to these stakes, and there are consequences for these actions. Characters don't just walk things off, they are changed both physically and emotionally by the events of this game. All the characters get their time to shine in the spotlight. Bentley has a great arc in this game and really gets to shine once Sly and Murray are captured. In a lesser game, Sly would have just broke the gang out, leaving Bentley useless with nothing to do. But here you get to fully play as Bentley as he overcomes his fears and saves his friends. This event deepens their bond even more, shown in the end of mission cutscenes. Sure, you can say the things that I've listed aren't anything special and in fact should not be praised because any competent story should already have them, and I do agree with you to an extent, but it does the things it sets out to do so well and takes basic genre conventions and does interesting things with them instead of just doing the same thing that everyone else does, which is why people remember games like Sly Cooper and not Tak and the Power of Juju or any other shovelware PS2 mascot platformer. Though I think the final twist having Neela be the main big bad was somewhat underwhelming. Not that Arpeggio was so much better than her, but building up the Claw gang for the entire game only to have the rug pulled out right from under them, to have Neela turn into Clockla and have practically the same final boss fight from the first game feels like a meh climax to your game, which up until then had really good build up. The actual final scenes of the game end on a great if not bittersweet note, but the boss beforehand really de-elevates the game for me. Not enough to make me hate it or think less of it, but I can't help but think how much more hype it could have been if it was something else. I loved the little touch in the end credits where you got to see where the Claw gang was after they've been rehabilitated, now being upstanding citizens and having clean jobs. It's these little details that help add to the game's world. Sly 2 is wonderful. I loved it despite the few issues I had with it. I think the sheer fact of how much it tried to do, it was inevitable that it was going to lead to a few missteps. I'm really excited to see what innovations they're going to bring to Sly 3 and what they're going to do with these characters and story. Sly 3 is the first game that I'm somewhat mixed on. It's not a 5 out of 10 mixed feeling, it's more that there's a decent amount of nagging issues that bothered me throughout my playthrough. This is by far the worst of the 3 ports in my experience. The entire pirate ship section of the 5th episode, which is more than half of that level, runs like absolute shit. It was amazing when it managed to get up to 60 FPS for a few seconds only to dip right back down into the 20s, and in some cases 10s. I ran into a few bugs like characters missing from cutscenes, like this one here where Panda King is supposed to be talking to Sly, yet he isn't in the scene itself, only showing up once he jumps away out of frame. This game has by far the biggest issue with it now being 16:9, having characters who are supposed to have run away now just being slightly off screen. This issue doesn't really bother me that much because of course these games were not designed with you ever to be able to see beyond the boundaries of 4x3, so more often than not I just found it kind of funny, but it still occasionally took me out of the moment. But enough issues that are port related, let's talk about the issues I had with the actual game itself. I really dislike the new voice for Carmelita, which is changed for every game. I went ahead and looked, and it does in fact change in 4 as well. Her voice in 2 was by far my favorite out of the 4. In this game, she sounds like she struggles to say some of the words or is just tripping over her delivery that could have been fixed with another take. The biggest issue I see with the voice change is the actual direction her voice was given. In 1 and 2, while serious and got mad, she had her flirtatious, playful side with Sly, and even tried to deny it when confronted by other characters like Neela. But in this game, for large chunks of it, she just comes off as an aggressive asshole, which feels out of place with how 2 ends with her excited to pursue him again, making a nostalgic loving smile. Then when she returns home, the bottle he stole was returned to her with a note on her desk. It feels like Carmelita at the end of 2 and the Carmelita for most of 3 are different characters. Then she comes off more in line with her second game incarnation in the last level where she suddenly loves him again, and then they end up together with Sly while he's pretending to have lost his memories to leave his life of thieving behind to be with her. This is either a writing problem, which even if they got back the actress from 2, wouldn't have played out that well because it still goes against the ending of the previous game. Unless there was supposed to be some events between these games that were shown in something like a comic book, then the jump in character doesn't make sense. The other possibility being this is an issue with voice direction, where these lines were written to be more playful, but they were directed more aggressive due to either a disconnect between the writers and directors or due to the limited capability of the actress. I think it's a little bit of both a writing and directing issue. Sure, some of these lines you could see be delivered more playfully akin to the second game, but then there are still some lines that don't fit the narrative that they established at all. My reasoning behind this idea is that Carmelita isn't the only character that feels like a step down from their Band of Thieves incarnation. Murray feels like his character has regressed back to loud idiot from the first game when he had grown to be much more than that in Band of Thieves. I said in the Band of Thieves section that it felt like the writers fully understood their characters and how to grow them from the events they experienced, but with Murray in 3 it feels like a flanderization of his character. Like the only thing they took away from 2 is that, oh, he's the fat, loud, and stupid one. Despite being the same voice actor, he sounds different from the previous 2 games. It sounds like Murray's trying to do his best Pumbaa impression from The Lion King, always talking with this raspy, yelling voice that sounds like he's leaning too hard on the back of his vocal cords.
I see that boat go out of control and jump and smash into that thing. Destruction. So cool. If it wasn't for the guru, I wouldn't be the Murray you see before you today. I'm just not too sure he'll be pleased with my progress as a mystic. The walk up here tired me out. I don't want to turn around now. It's the team van. Last time I saw it, it was floating away on a block of ice in Canada. And now it's here. Greetings, citizen. I hope you weren't harmed by my meteoropic entrance. I'm so glad to see you. They've been forcing me to eat meals covered in spice. Oh, what? You gonna throw me in solitary? Bring it on! Another barrier stands before you. Fear not, I shall bend it like the truth.
The entire game, Murray is either yelling while talking to people not even a foot away from him, or yelling about breaking things. The only time Murray as a character gets to shine in the entire game is at the end to resolve a last-minute forced conflict between the group, but we'll get more into that in just a bit. The gameplay itself is still as good as ever, if not the best yet, with the quality of life improvements like Bentley and Murray now being able to pickpocket guards, and items just instantly giving you money instead of needing to go back to the safe house and selling them on ThiefNet, or new additions like disguises, hidden codes and paintings, and 5 new playable characters with unique abilities and skill sets. Though I dislike how you had to rebuy a bunch of the abilities from 2. I wish they just carried them over and allowed you just to focus on the new abilities, but I guess it's some sort of unspoken video game law to make players rebuy upgrades when going from game to game, even if it doesn't make sense why you would have to. Overall, it's more of the same gameplay wise, but what's really interesting is the level design. It keeps the open hub world-like design from 2 with selectable missions sprinkled about. Sadly, you can't swap whenever you want or start a job as any character, but what I really like is that more of the missions are platforming challenges akin to Sly 1 levels. The final area even feels like a callback design-wise to the end of Sly 1, where it tests you on everything you've learned on your journey throughout the series. Sucker Punch was really experimenting with what they could have the players do. There's even crazier shit going on here than in Band of Thieves, fighting a giant Carmelita who's possessed by an ancient mystical mask in the outback of Australia, competing in a dogfighting competition with a 20-to-1 odds, ending with you jumping out of your plane onto another and fighting the boss on the wing, and returning to things dropped from the jump of Sly 1 to 2. Even if some of those things probably should have stayed in Sly 1. Like the driving stuff. My issues with the writing of some characters aside, I really like the whole story overall. Assembling a team to pull off their toughest heist yet is a great idea. It puts the focus on the gang itself and their dynamics within it, allowing allowing for some great character moments. But in doing so, I felt that Dr. M was far weaker as a villain than he realistically should have been given his backstory. The game starts in media res, so we get to see him be an asshole at the start, but until you loop back around for the final level, you don't see or hear about him at all, just his island that they're trying to plan how to break into. He was the Bentley of Sly's father's gang, which gets revealed only at the very end of the game. I wish McSweeney, the Murray of their gang, got more screen time in this game too, but they seem to want to leave Father Cooper to the player's imagination with a few show, don't tell comic book cutscenes. You don't even get to see his face in the Cooper family vault at the very end, which further supports this idea. After some contemplation, I guess it's more of what Dr. M symbolizes rather than what he actually is. He is a possibility for what Bentley can become, which is an interesting prospect, but I have one issue with that. Bentley's doubts at the end of the game when Sly goes into the vault feel out of nowhere. Now you may be thinking that they set up that Bentley was jealous of Sly throughout the game, and yes, you're right, but it was all based on who was receiving the affection of Penelope. Bentley never blamed Sly or Murray for what happened to his legs at the end of the previous game. The only signs of issue was when Penelope was drooling all over Sly, and Bentley says,
"Be still, my heart." She made an obscure NASA reference. Why do the girls always have to go for Sly? It's just not fair.
This jealousy is even tackled head on in the previous episode when he has his talk with Penelope.
Wow, Sly's really taught you a lot.
Sly? We're a team. In case you haven't noticed, I'm the brains of the operation. He's just the field man.
Just the field man? Sounds like you're jealous.
Well, yeah, I wish I wasn't in this chair. I wish I could run on tight ropes and jump on flag poles and all that stuff, but I can't.
You can do other stuff. Sly can't rewire a satellite or write ASCII code.
Sly can't even spell ASCII.
Yeah, he's not the most technical guy. Hey, let's get moving. We won't find the back entrance just standing around. Oh, sorry about that standing comment.
Give me a break, Penelope. It's just an expression.
And at the end of the mission, the two of them even start their relationship after growing closer over the course of the episode, where Bentley continuously gets to prove his strengths and Penelope realizes that she had a surface level attraction to Sly, who wasn't even reciprocating her feelings and was even reacting awkwardly to them like he didn't know how to handle her affection. So this issue Bentley is having about being second fiddle to Sly goes against the issues established. Unless we are supposed to believe a smart, analytical character like Bentley could be swayed by a few sentences from Dr. M he heard over Sly's radio a few minutes prior. Then Murray resolves this issue, which good on Murray getting to have a character again, even if it's just for a scene, but he resolves this issue as fast as it shows up, making this whole last minute build-up feel pointless. I do love how this game ends though. Sly gets injured and fakes losing his memories and leaves his life of thieving behind to be with Carmelita, which at the start of the level he said he would do if he got another chance. Bentley and Penelope stay together and protect the new Cooper Vault, which even has Murray and Bentley on it now, which is a nice little touch. Murray becomes a racer with the now reclaimed van, Panda King lives his life a few doors down from his daughter, Dimitri becomes famous thanks to his reclaimed family heirloom diving suit, Guru starts to mentor more people, everyone gets their happy ending, and the series could honestly have just ended here and I would have been completely satisfied. While being open enough to have a continuation, it has enough closure that I wouldn't feel burned if we were never to get another sequel. I was surprised that the time travel point was actually from the ending of this game and not something that was brought in for the 7th gen revival. I had guessed beforehand that it was going to be a tacked on plot point so the story of the 4th game could happen, but it did seem just as a joke for the ending of this game rather than an actual plot point that should be followed up on. While I had my issues with this game, I still liked it a lot, though not as much as 2. I fear that I'm setting myself up for disappointment because going into the 4th game, I do know that it ends on a cliffhanger of some sort, and that it's probably never going to be resolved. Hopefully it's not gonna sting that bad. After the completion of Sly 3, Sucker Punch went on to make the Infamous series during the 7th generation. That's where Sanzaru Games comes in, the developers behind the HD collection I just talked about. After they finished the collection, Sony gave them the green light to make the 4th installment in the series. It's probably the weakest installment when comparing it to 2 and 3, but I don't think it's unsalvageable. This game has its issues, but with the experience of making this game and receiving constructive criticism, I think they could make something on par with Sly 2. So first up, let's talk about my issues with the game. I really dislike the new animated cutscenes. The comic book cutscenes from the previous games felt like they fit the tone so much better. I don't think they're bad, but the difference seems pretty indicative of the era they were made in. They now look more like a really forgettable mid-2000s Cartoon Network show. In a vacuum, I probably wouldn't have disliked these, but I think the old style was far more compelling. I specifically really dislike Sly and Carmelita's redesigns in these cutscenes. I don't like their in-game counterparts all that much either, but I found the in-game Sly model starting to grow on me. Nobody shuts up in this game. Characters cannot go what feels like 30 seconds without blurting out some unfunny quip. Bentley is by far the worst offender.
The last time I was in these sewers, I was just a teenager. Well, that was a blast. Thank you, technology. Why didn't I wear my rubber gloves? Who says turtles are...
They do this so much that they sometimes loop because they don't have enough things to say.
Time to pay old Toothpick back for stealing the gold I should have took. Time to pay old Toothpick back for stealing the gold I should have took.
Cutscenes also have a few issues with dialogue. Character lines come in too early and play over each other where it doesn't make sense.
Almost depleted.
Can't we just starve these filthy hoodlums into submission?
The banter between characters like Sly and Bentley feel less witty. They constantly crack unfunny jokes at each other, as if we were supposed to find this endearing despite both of the characters never being amused by the other's antics, and it feels like they're just going through the motions.
I bet the farm it's Gallon's Cade.
You have a farm?
Just get over there.
If they had less jokes to where it doesn't feel like there's one at the end of every other sentence, it would maybe come off more cute and you get a chuckle out of me from time to time. But as is, I kept yelling at my TV for them to shut up. The rest of my writing complaints stem from what actually happens in the game story, so before we get into that, let's finish up with the gameplay issues. The game runs like ass. Every world has terrible frame rate drops. Anytime you're overlooking the level at any decent elevation, expect the frame rate to tank. Loading times are so long in this game. Basic transitions are at least 50 seconds. Your first loading of any play session is going to take multiple minutes, so you're better off just turning it on and walking away to go to the bathroom or get a drink or some food because it's gonna be a while. They still do not have subtitles for non-cutscene dialogue. This game came out in 2013 and I find that honestly unacceptable. It was annoying in the previous 3 games, but those were made on the PS2 during a time where a feature like that was not standard or thought to be standard. But I can't think off the top of my head any game that came out during the PS3 era, especially late into the PS3 era like 2013, that didn't have subtitles during gameplay. I find Bentley really irritating to play in this game due to feeling much worse than his 3rd game iteration. His speed boost upgrade doesn't get you anywhere compared to the other versions. The thrust jump is also way worse. With upgrades, it used to allow you to do a triple jump. Now it's a single jump with a short hover. At least in this game it did feel justified to have to buy back your old abilities, and thankfully you can buy the paraglider right away. But on the other hand, to justify playing as some of your ancestors, you had to forget moves that you used in previous games, because if you could use those old abilities, your ancestors would have nothing to bring to the table, like the ice climbing canes from 2. If you had those, then there's no reason to play as Bob in the Ice Age level. The detection for what you're trying to jump onto or latch onto is probably the worst it's been yet. It is beyond frustrating in the final boss, where not only is it hard to tell which lane the orbs are flying at you from, since the lanes are bent at an angle so they overlap, but you'll jump to the wrong line when it doesn't even make sense and die. This is the worst boss fight in the whole series because of it. The story overall is alright. It's a big, fat okay. It's not the worst thing ever, but it certainly isn't anything to write home about. Usually time travel plots like these are eye-roll inducing, and it does hit that point for me at the end with La Paradox's motives, but going back to see your ancestors was actually really cool. It easily could have been much worse with ruining the mysticism of the past Cooper clan members, like when a game series shows too much of their legendary figures, good or bad, and they are far more underwhelming than what you thought up of from just hearing a few stories about them. My first issue with the story is how it continues Sly's character from the end of 3. Thieves in Time makes it so after he left to be with Carmelita, he was still always craving to steal things, which is a complete betrayal of his resolution at the end of 3, where he says if he could get another chance, he would tell Carmelita how he felt and be with her.
Funny, but here I am at the end, and suddenly all I can think about is what a coward I've been towards Carmelita. I never took the next step. Looking at Bentley and Penelope, it's clear what life is about. If Carmelita was here, I'd tell her straight out how I feel, and quit playing around. Put our professional differences aside and see if we can make it work. But that'll never happen now.
But as time went on, the old itch came back, and I knew I needed to pull a heist.
Then later in the game, it's revealed that she knew the whole time that he didn't lose his memories, and he was also still craving to steal things. So their whole relationship was built on lies, which feels pretty shitty. I can't believe Sly getting cucked by his ancestors is actually what's happening in this game, Jesus Christ. Carmelita's understandably really angry about this whole situation, but at the same time, this feels like a really petty way for her to get back at Sly, and it just feels so out of place for these characters. Why did they write it like this? Their whole relationship with how it's handled from the continuation from the end of 3 is my biggest issue with the narrative of this game. The second biggest issue is Penelope, who has now betrayed the Cooper gang and is pretty much the sole reason the bad guys are able to do anything. They turned her into a discount Metal Gear villain, going on about making money off of weapons they could be making instead of protecting the Cooper family vault and everything else encompassing the Cooper gang. She also hates Sly now for some reason and thinks he's holding Bentley back, which is another thing that feels completely out of nowhere. You were drooling over Sly for most of the last game, now you suddenly hate his very existence and want to write him out of history so Bentley could come to his senses. The game clearly has some setup for her character in a sequel we'll never get at the end of the game, so maybe with further expansion this could have worked, but as is, it sucks and makes this character incredibly stupid when they're supposed to be the second smartest person in the entire world behind Bentley. Your family getting erased from history was a cool setup, but once you get to the later stages of the game's plot and talk face to face with La Paradox, that's where it starts to fall apart for me. It becomes another I'm getting revenge for my family because they were overshadowed by the Giga Chad Cooper clan, which was a plot they already did with Clockwork, and the whole being in the shadow of Sly's father was already the main motivation for the villain in 3. Paradox is just a whiny, shit villain that's jealous, and I could not stand hearing him speak. This made the ending where Sly calls him the little bitch that he is super satisfying.
An idiot? You had it made. You could have been the biggest thief of all time, but you had to target my ancestors and blow your own cover. You exposed your operation because of your ego. No Cooper would have done that. And for the record, can you really say you stole the canes? Seems like your friends did all the real work.
The whole time traveling thing is also where your suspension of disbelief is going to be really tested, because of course you need to set everything right in the timeline to prevent Paradox from creating the fake documents and this fake royal family for himself so he can be the ruler of the world, but you're also fucking with the timeline to the point where you're greatly warping the outcomes of things with the slightest alterations, ignoring things like, oh, you killed these guards who would still be alive if not for you, so every person they're related to or ever come in contact now either don't exist or their lives are greatly warped. Sly's ancestors all know about time travel now. They all go to the future and see what it's like, so they won't play out their lives exactly the same, which is addressed in the credits with how their legacies are now even greater thanks to the things you taught them about honor. But this doesn't change all the other shit that still happens in these time periods, like all the robots and tech that are brought to these time periods and left there because you guys don't come and collect it. Or at least it's not shown that you do. So now all these laser-based weapons and robots are just lying around. You just have to ignore that not a single person saw all this new shit and somehow didn't alter the timeline because of their knowledge of these things. Like, you're telling me all these people didn't see this shit and think up some new inventions that would somehow alter time? Bentley mentions that you can't steal all this treasure in the India level because parts of it are supposed to be found by later Coopers down the timeline. So they address the idea about messing with the placement of things, yet you can still steal from every enemy in the game. You just made some kid in the past starve, Sly, you greedy fucking asshole. Just because you acknowledge that these things are there doesn't mean that this still isn't an issue with your narrative, and it's why time travel plots are stupid. Then we get to the ending, and it just makes me depressed thinking about it. So Sly ends up fighting Paradox in his time-traveling blimp as it's falling apart, and in an act of mercy saves Paradox so he wouldn't fall to his death. But then Paradox steals his glider, which he then uses only to get hit by a plane and fall and somehow still live. I guess it wouldn't have been an E-rated game if they killed him here, so they had to change it. So then Sly is shot somewhere into time and no one knows where. The player doesn't even get to see what happens to Sly. It's a pretty sad ending, and it only is made worse because this wasn't supposed to be the ending. A DLC was supposed to come out, which continued the story, but the game didn't sell well enough for that to happen. Zara wants to continue making Sly games, but as they say in this clip here, it's all up to Sony.
But we would love to come back to that world. I hate leaving them there. It's the question we get the most.
Sure.
So all I can say is, you know, if you guys want more Sly Cooper, let Sony know.
Herman Hulse, hit him up.
Yeah, but we're ready. We're always ready to dig into that.
Awesome.
And it was a great franchise to work on, and we really miss it.
I hope you get back to it one day. I liked what you guys did a lot with it.
We're probably never going to see a sequel, since Sony seems more than happy making cinematic third-person games for people who are still trying to convince the ghost of Roger Ebert that games are art. So with no continuation, this ending leaves Sly effectively dead. With all the nostalgia pandering that's been going around lately, with every PS1 and 2 era game getting a remake or a remaster, I think that enough time has passed that they could bring back Sly and it would be a success. Obviously, they'd have to be realistic with their goals. I think if they made a smaller scale title that was released at $30, similar to Ratchet and Clank Into the Nexus, I think it would do well. But also, I think that's the reason why we won't see another game, because if it isn't gonna print money like The Last of Us 2, why bother? What if by some miracle we do get another game? Some changes I would love to see would be the return to the old comic book styled cutscenes. Make Sly and Carmelita look more in line with their old designs. And the last thing I know is unreasonable, but bring back Carmelita's voice from 2. She was by far the best of the 4. As a whole, I loved the series and the time I spent playing it. I'm going to hold out hope that we get a continuation someday, and if we do, they don't go overboard with making it look super graphically impressive, because I find that remakes of all the other nostalgic properties lose some of their charm and identity by doing this, like Crash and Ratchet. But that might just be the boomer in me who likes how his old games look shitty and find the imperfections charming. I think Sly 2 is my favorite of the 4 games. If 3 didn't have a bunch of issues with the writing of some of their characters, I think I would have had that one as my favorite. Even with those issues, I still found it a great send-off to the series if it just wanted to end there. Sly 1 is really good. It's hard to compare it though to the other games because it's like DMC 1 to the rest of the series, where you see how it got from there to the modern games, but it's not an easy one-to-one comparison. As for what series I'm going to do videos like this next, it's probably either going to be No More Heroes, which I want to do closer to the release of 3s whenever we get a release date. It'd be slightly different from this video and the Ninja Gaiden one because I've played No More Heroes before, but it's been a few years, so I'm excited to go back and play these games again. If we don't get a release date for No More Heroes anytime soon, I will probably do the Ratchet and Clank Future Trilogy, which is another one that I've already played, but I'm interested to see how my opinions have changed over the years, if I still dislike them as much as I did. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks for watching. If you liked the video and the channel, consider subscribing and maybe becoming a patron on Patreon. If you want updates about the channel and what videos are being worked on and just shitty and unfunny memes from me, follow me on Twitter. I have a TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. If you're a Yu-Gi-Oh player or any other TCG player in general, purchasing anything from the site will directly help support the channel. The next video to be released should be Hitman Contracts Retrospective. If anything else comes out before then, it'll probably be some smaller videos that I was able to make quickly while working on that in the background. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.